Hi, this is your coach back. We're going to deal with the pro forma. Now, it's a lot of numbers here, and you might think it's a little bit boring, but it's the most important piece of acquiring property is the pro forma, to do a proper pro forma. The good news is that tonight I'm going to be teaching in class Proformas. So I'm going to have a chance to perhaps share with you some of the excitement and make it a little bit more interesting. But there's a few things that I want to make sure you understand before we get into it. I want you to carefully read over the capitalization rate determination. Also, you hear people say a cap rate is 10, a cap rate is 8. A cap rate is simply the rate of return you want to invest in something. If something is in downtown Birmingham and it makes $10,000 a year, you may take a 5% cap rate. Now that's better than the bank. The bank gives you essentially a 1% cap rate if you want to. It gives you a 1% return. So somebody could argue, well, you get 5% rather than 1%. So if something made $10,000 and you got a 5% return or a 5% cap rate, you would pay $200,000 for it, because $200,000 at 5% return would yield 10%. Now, if you wanted a 10% return, of course, because you felt it was a little bit more risky or not as sexy, you would pay $100,000 for it, because $100,000 at 10% is $10,000. Let's take that same $10,000 and say if it was a 20% return. If it was a 20% return, obviously you would pay $50,000 for it because you thought it was very risky and you want to get a return as fast as you possibly can. So the cap rate determination is very, very important, especially when you're laying out the information for an appraiser. The good news is the cap rate has two pieces to it. One of the pieces is the equity. In other words, the amount of money you put down. What percent do you normally have to put down? 10%, 20%, 25%? And what return do you want on the equity itself, on the equity? The other part of it is the debt rate. How much you're going to borrow, and what is the debt rate percentage that you have to pay on the borrowed money. Now, I didn't say just the interest rate. I said the debt rate. There's a difference between the interest rate and the debt rate. The debt rate would take into consideration the principal portion of the payment too. For example, if you had a 4.5% interest rate over 30 years, I believe that come out to 6.08% debt rate. I'm taking it off the top of my head now. Maybe I should check that. But it would be 6.08% debt rate, although the interest rate is 4.5%. Once you add on the principal and interest, once you add the principal to the interest, it increases the rate. It is, in other words, the principal and interest combined, expressed as a percent. Say debt constant. Debt constant and debt rate is the same thing. So it's simply a blend. You see, on my equity rate, 25%, for example, on my equity rate, I want 12%. So you would say 12 times 25, that's 3.0. So on 25% of it, you got 3.0. Then, for example, if you had a debt rate of 7% over 30 years, in the case in the book, and that is 75% of the equation, then that would equal, let's say if your debt rate is 10%, your debt rate is 10. That's principal and interest combined is 10%. Times 75, that would be 7.5. So you blend them two together, 3.0, 7.5. 10.5% would be your cap rate. So you would add your equity rate and your debt rate together and you end up with your cap rate. I would like for you to do some exercises on that. And go to your amortization schedule in Student Corner, download it, and just fill in a whole bunch of examples. Always use one with nothing but zeros behind it to properly determine what the cap rate is, because the payment is the same as the cap rate. times 12. The cap rate is annualized, not monthly. In other words, the amount you want to finance is either $1, $10, $100, or $1,000, or $1 million, just it doesn't matter. Then you type in the interest rate and the number of years. And whatever the mortgage payment is times 12, that's your cap rate. That amount is already determined on the left side of the sheet. It would pop up. So your annual payment on $1 million or $100,000 is equal to your cap rate. I'd like for you to have a little fun and practice that for a while. That's the main thing. The other part is going to get pretty easy because we're going to determine the number of units. That's easy to fill in. The vacancy and collection factor, that's not a very hard thing to do. That's pretty much based upon what the vacancy factor is for the area. But don't be fooled now. It's not just vacancy, it's collection. Collection for properties consisting of a lot of seniors is going to be a lot different than a apartment building with a lot of young people, because the young people with high rents are going to have a much higher collection problem, where seniors, you may have 98% collection, even 99. I once had a property where I collected 100% of the rents every single month from the seniors. Boy, I miss those days. And insurance costs, you got to take and do a little research on the insurance because it's an ever-changing model, and it's based on the area, the history of the property. So get you a couple of insurance quotes when you get ready to fill out the insurance. The good thing about the Proforma is that the assumptions, just fill out the assumptions, and it populates the Proforma itself. It will populate the Proforma. The maintenance cost per unit should be factored in. We normally take it about 10% of whatever the rent is. Like one monthly rent payment could very well be which is about 8% in that case, about what the maintenance should be. Now, why do we use that? Because it could run higher or lower, but it's based upon you fixing the property up. And once you fix it up, how much does it take to maintain it? If a property is even in bad shape, when you look at it, you say, oh, it's going to cost way more to maintain it. Not if you fix it up and bring it up. We're talking about a model where you bring it up and do all of the necessary capital improvements so that you will not take your cash flow and use towards fixing the property up or have a higher maintenance cost per unit than normal. And the reason you don't want to do that is because cash flow is multiplied 10 times. 10 times. So you don't want to, you don't want to take $1 and spend it on maintenance if you don't have to, because you just gave up $10. You want to do all of your maintenance up front and put it into capital, put it into the cost, not into the cash flow. This is very, very, very important. You would hurt yourself by using your cash flow to do your fix up. Now, if that be the case, fine, because you're not selling it now. Once you take your cash flow, fix it up, and it's thoroughly fixed up, thoroughly completed, just complete all the work. And at that point, you can enjoy your cash flow and get the maximum bang for your buck. Management fees, you have to put a management fee in. If someone gives you the operating statement, they don't have a management fee, so what? You have to have a management fee because it's your time. Management fees should run 5 to 8%, and it's increasingly going towards 8% because 5% is usually not enough. You don't discount your time, and if you do not count your management, you want to count that in cash flow, it's a mistake because the banks are going to count management fee anyway. And so you must count. In other words, if the bank is going to loan you money, they're going to ask the question, what happens if you default? They're going to have to take the property back, and the bank is not going to manage it. They're going to hire a management company. So you have to have that figured in. The water per unit is anywhere from $450 to $750 or even $1,000 in some of the municipalities. Look at the water bill. There's municipalities around Detroit with $1,000 water bill per unit. Can you imagine that? That would be shocking, you understand, because it's not just the water consumption, it's also the sewer charges. So that is where it plays very important. The gas per unit. Gas per unit could run about $1 per square feet per year in Detroit, basically in the Detroit area. So if you have a 650 square foot apartment, that's about what the gas is going to run, about $650 per unit. Can it run more? Yes. With bad windows, can it run less? Yes. With very, very good windows and very tightly ran, it may run 10% on either side of that. The electric per unit usually run about $150 per unit per year, and it's the most stable at this point utility that we've had, whereas the water went from $150 to $500 in the last 15 years. The gas have went from 80 cents a foot to $1 a foot. The electric has barely budged. So where once electrical stuff was at a disadvantage, it is now beginning to catch up. So pay attention to that. And the other thing about electric is that you don't have the maintenance. You certainly don't have the maintenance on electrical baseboard heat. You don't have a boiler down there. You don't have mechanicals that you got to take and worry about, steam, traps, and all of that kind of stuff that can easily go wrong with boilers. Electrical is cleaner, it's easier, and it's much, much, much lower maintenance. So there's some things to be said about that. Now you got cap replacements per unit, capital replacements. What is cap? Roofs, windows, carpeting, appliances. These are capital items. Some people want to throw in garbage disposals. Okay, it's a small cap item. That's the smallest one. But a lot of people take their operating expenses and they take their cap and put it in operating expenses so they can write it off. Well, that's okay if you're hanging on to it and you don't want to finance and you don't want to do anything. But look, when you get ready to finance this, or when you get ready to sell it, you definitely do not want to take your capital items and run it through your maintenance, because capital items is not deducted. Remember that now. The capitalized items, they are one-time items and they're not deducted as expense. They essentially is amortized over the life of a loan. But let's say if you have an average of so much per year, then theoretically it gets deducted anyway because you're spending an average amount. So that actually does come out of cash flow. But do not try to run as much as you can through capital. I mean through expenses if you're trying to sell the property. Put as much as you can into capital, and because you can better define capital to the banks. So your operating expense growth, 3% is fine, because you want to evaluate the property upon acquisition, or in 1 year, or you could say upon acquisition, this is how I'm buying it, and upon stabilization. You could define that year 1, year 2, or year 1 and stabilization, which may be 5 years, or what market, or at market. Remember, the Proforma itself, you can change the words around. You can be flexible on it, so you can change it. Nothing is edged in stone, so to speak. Now, the first mortgage constant, we're back to the debt rate. That's the debt rate, your first mortgage constant. And there's an amortization schedule you could go through and run what your mortgage constant is. So you could simply just go straight to the website and type in from one of the lenders, tell them you got a $100,000 loan, see what their rates are going for. The rates is 4%. They'll tell you. They said 30 years is 4%, 15 years is 3.65%, 10 years is 3%. They'll tell you, how many years do you want to amortize? In other words, how many years do you want to pay off the mortgage? That's what amortization is. It's scheduled mortgage payments. So you can get that really quickly. And the second mortgage constant is only applicable if you're going to do a second mortgage. The percent finance, you can plug that in. If it's 75%, 80%, 90%, 96.5%, like for FHA. And now that completes the assumption itself on the Proforma. You have to now type in the rent roll. Type that number in. The rents are this, and then you're going to type in the projected rents. You know where you got that number from your underwriting. You got that from your underwriting. I'm going to just kind of flip through this really quickly. So that will automatically pop out the income. Your gross rental is automatically calculated from your rent roll. Other income is calculated at 3.5% to 4%, and it includes laundry income, late fees, application fees, miscellaneous. That gives you a total gross income. Then once you take out your vacancy and collection, then you have what you call the effective gross income. That's a very important term to understand. You can't tell somebody the income is so much. They say, when you say income, what do you mean? The gross income, the net income, the effective gross? What are you talking about? You talking about just your rents added all the way up? Did you take out vacancy? Banks want to know what is your effective gross income. Say that. Effective gross income. Remember, when you say something, you can remember it better. So say it one more time. There you go. You got it. Effective gross income. Your operating expenses. These are the expenses that you're going to live with. And don't skip any of them. I do not care if the seller gave you his tax return and they're not there. Who in the hell cares? Let me tell you something. You know what the seller will leave out? The seller may buy the supplies and stuff, and they will leave out his salary. But you are going to hire a manager or a maintenance person. You're going to have to pay them. So do not be persuaded by these statements the owner give you, which is skinny on expenses. They may be trying to sell it, so they increase that cash flow and tell you, well, I don't have this, I don't have that. You're going to have it. That's the point. Property taxes, the real and personal taxes, get them both, because there is personal taxes too, and pull the tax bill to make sure that the uncapped value is considered. And if you're going to moderate it or try to keep it down, go down there and visit the assessor, as we earlier told you. But you want to know the real number. You don't want to buy something and the value uncaps and you start crying because your taxes doubled, and once that happened, it wasn't worth it. Property insurance, maintenance, and repairs, those things there is pretty much going to be filled in automatically from your assumptions. Boom, boom, boom. Payroll and taxes, you have to fill in yourself. And normally, payroll should run 8 to 10% of whatever the income is. That's the industry rule, 8 to 10% of whatever the gross is. Property management fees, that fills in based on what you put in, 5 to 10%, 5 to 8%. Water, gas, electric, normal capital, that's all plugged in from your assumptions. Legal, audit, administrative, and marketing, you've got to plug in. Do you need a good marketing budget? Legal, you got to have some legal and audit, because if you didn't even ever go to court, you still got audit, you got to do a tax return. Now, if it's yours 100% by yourself, you're going to go do it on Schedule C. If it's a tax return with partners, it's called a 1065, and everybody got to get a K1. It's going to cost you $500 to $1,000 to $1,500 to do a simple deal. So it could go up to $5,000 if it's a larger development. So you got to put in legal and audit, and more than likely you're going to go to court a few times, and you need to take and factor that in, which means that you're going to have a relationship with a lawyer. Now, if you don't have a good relationship, when you're down in court the first time, you may pay a very generous amount to the first lawyer because you don't know who the, quote, real estate landlord-tenant lawyers are. But you'll see them down there, and you want to approach them, get their card, or ask someone down in court, and those are the lawyers you want to use because they're there every day, and they may charge you, for example, $25 to $50 a case, whereas a lawyer who have to come down there and spend 2 or 3 hours down there may end up charging you $300 or $400. Those who are already down there is just another case to add it on. So make sure that in establishing your relationships, we don't leave off the legal. You may not know who they are, but once you get to landlord-tenant court, it won't be too hard to figure it out, or you could just ask someone. So that's the total operating expense. Now, after that, that's total operating expenses. You have your most impressive number, which is net operating income, the NOI, NOI. NOI, net operating income. That's what it is. And that's the number that you're going to deal with. And that's established value. That's the number that you divide the cap rate in. You know, if your net operating income is $23,000 at a 10% cap rate, it's $230,000. At a 5% cap rate, it's double, $460,000. So you see that cap rate is very important. So you want to be able to prove your cap rate as much as you possibly can. If you're in an area that has high demand and a low risk, your cap rate should run you 6, 7, or 8%. If you're in a very high-end area, like if it's Riverfront Towers, it might run 5% because it's high-end and the growth is going to continue going up. The good news is in Detroit, our cap rates are very healthy, like 8 to 10%. There, which leaves a lot of value because they're being pushed down as more investors come in and normalize Detroit. In other words, you're going to have national averages because Detroit is one of the hottest places on earth right now. Let's face it. Detroit is hot. Proof 48201 zip code had a 48.93% poverty rate just 4 years ago. Today, it is the hottest zip code in the entire United States from an appreciation point of view. That's going to push down cap rates. They'll be 5%, just like they are in California, I would say New York, but New York have cap rates of 3 and 4% even, especially when interest rates are low. If interest rates are 4%, people will say, well, look, the cap rate is 4. Now, so you have a net operating income, and I'm going to put a plug in it right there because we're going to get into how to structure the properties to leverage them 100% and pull cash out once you've determined your net operating income. But I want you to go back and play with your performer to get the bugs out